There's no doubt that throughout the second half of the 20th century, Disney absolutely dominated the theme park industry through its sheer ambition and quality. That didn't stop other companies from trying to emulate them though, and throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s, many parks, especially in Europe, created rides that were obviously very derivative of what Disney had pioneered. However, that wasn't always the case, and there really were some incredible standouts that blew me away, both through their quality and originality. One of the biggest surprises from my extended trip to the United Kingdom last year, well, other than Blackpool Pleasure Beach being an absolute god-tier park, was just how much I liked Chessington World of Adventures. I really did very little research before going here, but it ended up becoming one of my favorite theme parks that I've ever visited, because while it has seen better days, you can really tell that in the past, it got substantial investment, and a lot of that effort still shines through today. I'm not even the target age demographic for the park, as it's definitely catering to younger children, but I always appreciate well-realized theming when I see it, and the park does an excellent job of blending these tastefully colorful areas with its animal exhibits. I've already talked about this park in a separate video though, and so the reason I'm bringing it up again is because people have been asking for me to cover its historic dark rides, particularly Professor Burp's Bubbleworks, which definitely has a strong following. So many people grew up in the UK who loved these classic dark rides that seem largely unknown outside of the country, and so having known little about them myself, I thought it would be interesting to do a brief history on the park and explore these fascinating rides. What's particularly interesting about Chessington World of Adventures is that the land it sits on used to be a royalist stronghold that was burnt down sometime between 1642 and 1660 during the English Civil War. The structure was rebuilt and is known as the Burnt Stub Mansion, although throughout the 18th and 19th century, it was built out and modified, turning it into the building that you see in the park today. Later, a London billiard hall operator named Reginald Stewart Goddard bought the site, and used it to display his private collection of exotic animals, opening as the Chessington Zoo in 1931. Skip forward to 1978, and the zoo was acquired by Pearson Group in collaboration with Madame Tussauds, as in, the company known for its famous wax museums. They were interested in the Chessington Zoo, as they wanted to expand their entertainment offerings and convert it into a theme park, and agreeing that this was a good idea, Tussauds was bought up by Pearson's the same year that they acquired the zoo, under which they would redevelop the property. Working with legendary English theme park designer and engineer John Wardley, Chessington Zoo was closed and reopened in 1987 as Chessington World of Adventures, filled with themed rides and areas, while still maintaining its animal exhibits in what was a spectacular transformation. Notable attractions included Dragon River, a well-themed flume attraction in the land called the Mystic East, as well as Runaway Mine Train, which was very clearly based off of Disney's Big Thunder Mountain, and was located in the Western American town of Calamity Canyon. However, the new park opened with an incredibly unique dark ride that took you into a bizarre computer dimension, making for one of the most captivating attractions that I've ever seen. This is just one of a good handful of highly original and first-rate dark rides built for the park, most of which were very much on the production level of Disney. So join me today as we dig into the history of Chessington World of Adventures, and explore its fascinating dark rides lost to time. While the early version of the park was very much focused thematically on the adventure aspect in its name, its original dark ride was known as the Fifth Dimension, which was very different from everything else with its science fiction theme. On entering the building, park guests watched an overhead queue video where they encountered a spokesperson for Hitachi, the corporate sponsor of the ride. If you weren't aware, Hitachi is a massive Japanese technology company that has its hand in many different industries, including, of course, computers. What's interesting about the Fifth Dimension video is that the spokesperson clearly indicates that Hitachi is directly responsible for sending you on a tour of the computer dimension, nervously assuring riders that the rumors of sacrificing people to a computer-made monster is completely false. This isn't just some corporate sponsor slapped onto a ride with maybe a mention in a line of dialogue, or their name on the sign. No, Hitachi actively plays a role in the story by having developed the fictional technology that brings you into the fifth dimension, which to my knowledge is completely unique within the theme park industry. The ride system itself was developed by Mock Rides, where the cars can turn to face different scenes on the track, and as riders boarded and left the station, they turned the corner and crashed through a hole in a grid, simulating the idea of entering through a computer screen. The vehicles proceeded through a dark tunnel with moving pinpoints of light that depicted riders being digitized, and moving into the fifth dimension, the vehicles stop and turn to face a robot. He introduces himself as Zap-O-Matic 552 and exclaims that you're the third train lost today, which is bad because this is the dark side of the computer where anything can happen. He's a funny character, as he often glitches and repeats the same word before slapping himself back to sensibility, but he assures you that you're lucky to have found him first, as he can help you if you encounter any danger. He warns riders about killer robots and a big slobbering monster with laser beam eyes and razor-sharp teeth that ate the last train of people. But after the end of this lengthy segment, he pulls a lever to start up his vehicle to travel with you, but ends up accidentally sending off riders instead. As the train moves into the next scene, a loud blast results in a puff of smoke next to the ride track, as if a projectile hit the cliff, and the scene lights up to reveal monsters that look somewhat like astronauts, pointing bazookas at the train. As their weapons light up, as if firing at the vehicle, Zap-O-Matic swoops in on his rocket and begins firing back, giving riders the chance to escape as the train moves forward. Proceeding into the next scene, Zap-O-Matic expresses that he's happy to see you as he repairs his Zapmobile, but warns that until he can catch up with you, that you should avoid falling into the slimy swamp. The train continues moving into dense foliage among the sound of bubbling mud, and encountering Zap-O-Matic yet again, he warns you to be quiet or else these swamp monsters might hear you. Quickly, they emerge from the pit of mud, and one instantly identifies that you're from the real world, telling riders that they'll eat anything and that you can't escape. Zap-O-Matic tries to fight the monsters but glitches out, and as the train continues moving forward, he warns you to watch out for the giant green slathering monster. Entering the next scene, riders yet again find themselves in danger as a new set of robots that look like soldiers begin firing zappers, but Zap-O-Matic swoops in and begins firing back. After lasers fly between both sides, the giant green slathering monster emerges from its slumber and begins moving towards the vehicle. Zap-O-Matic tells riders to fire back by hitting the button in their car, which apparently triggered a small blinking light that often didn't work reliably, but regardless, as the monster continues advancing, you eventually destroy him and the animatronic retreats. Congratulating riders on their victory, Zap-O-Matic asks you to follow his trail to find the way out as the vehicle moves forward. While the video of this ride does come from the Euro Theme Park archive, which did a great job of restoring this old footage, I'm still unclear on what exactly happens next. The ride vehicle appears to follow Zap-O-Matic past a waterfall where the music turns ominous, maybe showing a glimpse of the monster returning as if it wasn't truly defeated, but the footage is too dark to really see what is actually happening. Following Zap-O-Matic though, you hear him yell, and as riders pass the final scene, it depicts the Zapmobile as having crashed into what I think is a computer. Hanging from his rocket, Zap-O-Matic bids you goodbye, and insists that if you ever need help, give Zap-O-Matic a shout, which concludes the experience as riders return to the station. The fifth dimension was certainly a unique and compelling concept, but unfortunately, riders found its dialogue-heavy story to be a bit convoluted and confusing. Entering its second year of operation, the ride reopened with changes. It's not clear to me if Hitachi was dropped as a sponsor, but the cue video was changed to an animated cartoon, where Zap-O-Matic is sending out a distress signal. He simply conveys that he was sent in to repair the TV set, but is being pursued by what he calls the robot-eating Gorg. He panics and calls in the robot rescue service, which are the riders, who will board the vehicle and rescue him from the 5th dimension. The first scene where you enter the computer monitor is instantly different, as it's surrounded by blacklight illuminated books and colored pencils. The rest of the attraction is mostly the same as it was before, but the dialogue has changed to convey the simple premise that you're rescuing Zap-O-Matic and have to help him find a way out. After encountering the Monsters with Bazookas scene, instead of repairing his ship, Zap-O-Matic's workshop is now a computer room, although I can't clearly hear the dialogue in any video that I could find. He appears to say something about catching up to you, and the next few segments of the ride play out in a similar manner, first encountering danger in the swamp, and then moving on to fighting the Gorg, which was previously the giant green slathering monster. In the final scene, it appears that Zap-O-Matic still crashes his rocket, but he's now instead on the left side of the train, as if he hit the wall, although he still thanks you for getting him out safely. Weirdly, despite this being the version of the 5th dimension that most people experienced, its documentation is less clear than the original iteration. That being said, I still think it has a lot of merit as a well-realized attraction with a unique theme, and as the park expanded, Chessington would go on to create other interesting dark rides that only got more interesting. In 1990, the park opened its next themed area, known simply as Transylvania. It's a charming Transylvanian village that was anchored by a suspended aerodynamics coaster known as the Vampire, and it had a nearby eatery called the Black Forest Chateau, which inside was designed to look like the village, and even had an animatronic organist that would pop out of the stage. Eventually, he was repurposed as a vampiric viscount and put into the queue for Vampire, which I think was a great decision. John Wardley designed the coaster, but also a nearby indoor dark ride, known as Professor Burp's Bubbleworks, bringing riders on a tour through a Willy Wonka-esque soda or pop factory inside of the village, working as a very intentional contrast to the darker theme of the coaster. After waiting through the short queue, which advertised various fictional soft drinks, park visitors entered the station, which was designed to look like the village. Riders would then board small, free-floating rafts designed by Leisure Tech, and as they moved forward on the conveyor, they slid down into the water and entered Professor Burp's factory. Quickly, they passed by the professor and his mechanical dog made of pop cans who was named Fizzy, and the professor tells riders to enjoy the tour and to remember the secret formula, which is juice plus gas equals pop. Moving into the first large room, this is the first stage of the pop production process, where all the flavors are extracted from a series of puns designed to be gags. For example, the professor's workers known as Bubbleheads are hitting oranges in a squash court to extract orange squash, or a cow is being inflated in order to milk out cream soda. After flavor extraction, riders pass by a laughing Professor Burp as they enter the pressure room, where the laughing gas is created by tickling the cylinders of stored fizzy gas. Next, the ride proceeded into the mixing room, where again, through even more animatronic gags that you see here, you witness how the juices in the gas are mixed together to create Bubbleworks pop. Moving into a tunnel, a sign discusses the origin of soft drinks during the Big Pop, and a scene with a Bubblehead riding a pop rocket into space is a fun jest. It's difficult to see, but the next joke has a Bubblehead testing the strength of the gas content of the pop, where he farts into a bowl to ring a bell, exactly like a High Striker carnival game. Riders then pass by cups who are hiccuping a song into microphones, and then flow through the decontamination chamber, where Bubbleheads are sterilizing the bottles. Next, the ride opens up to a larger scene through a fun fair, where instead of a conveyor, the bottles of pop tumble down a spiral slide, make a trip around a carousel, and take a roller coaster to end up in the packing plant, all of which is manually powered by Professor Burp as he rides a bike overhead. Passing through an arch, the next scene shows the bottles as they're packaged up in crates, and the riders move up a small lift hill, On cresting the top, the riders slide down a slope, resulting in a small splash into the finale, where colored water jets simulate the idea of different flavors of pop flowing all around riders. Another effect that was difficult to observe on video was Professor Burp. He would stand on top of a bottle cap that would lift and lower with the fountain of pop underneath, which was a pretty effective illusion. After traveling through additional jets of pop over the ride track, riders would finally move through a series of bubbling archways and into a room with fireworks, encountering one last bubblehead who held up a sign, inviting you to pop in again before returning to the station. Professor Burp's Bubbleworks is one of the rides most highly requested on my channel, but I don't feel like I really did it justice because it is difficult to describe each scene. Between poor camcorder technology and the fact that the ride system spun you randomly, it's difficult to get a full sense of what each scene contained, although I tried to describe the overall theme of each room. It's also worth noting that the ride had an incredibly fun soundtrack, which had a main melody that would change in structure, tone, and instrumentation depending on which scene you were in. For example, the theme became a samba when passing by the Brazilian banana harvesting scene, or it became a mariachi tune when lemons were being juiced on sombreros. I also know that the ride is well remembered for having a variety of scents pumped at riders, although its documentation is so poor that I can't find specific information about which scents were present in which scenes. If you happen to have experienced this ride, please let me know what you could remember about its smells, as it would be interesting to have more context. With Chessington World of Adventures establishing itself as a strong theme park with well-themed areas, Transylvania was a great expansion 3 years after opening, introducing another spectacular area with the vampire and the legendary Professor Burp's Bubbleworks. However, among the adventure theme in the park, the fifth dimension continued to stand out as a weird thematic anomaly, and despite its high-quality theming, would soon close to be replaced. The fifth dimension closed at the end of the operating season in 1993, and for the next year, was replaced with a brand new ride in a new area, known as the Forbidden Kingdom. Themed to ancient Egypt, the new area included the Croc Drop, which despite being designed for kids, is still a great kinetic addition and well-themed drop tower. However, the building for the fifth dimension was completely gutted and rethemed as Terror Tomb, which was designed by Farmer Studios, with John Wardley having little input, as he was working on attractions for Alton Towers at the time. The creative team for this project was encouraged to think outside of the box, and, well, the result was rather crazy. On entering the queue, it was just a small series of switchbacks set to look like an Egyptian bazaar, and passing through the shop fronts, park guests would encounter Abdab's Tour of the Tomb, a small touring company office where you could see Abdab sleeping. I think the implication is that riders enter the tomb without him, as the queue immediately becomes a long hallway into the tomb itself. At the end of the hall, there's a cool illusion of an endless pit achieved simply through a mirror, and turning left, there's only a small bit of queue left before entering the ride station, which reveals that this attraction reused the previous ride system. On boarding, riders immediately move through a dark tomb decorated with stone jackals, and encounter Abdab, who has woken up from his nap. He chastises riders for having entered the tomb, claiming that his prized emerald is for him to possess, and from here, the vehicles turn into a long corridor where they're almost crushed by a rolling boulder. Moving through the darkness, hissing snakes are heard as they dangle from the ceiling, and the next scene opens up to a massive pit, where a stream of snakes flowing out of the wall fall down below through a cool wheel effect. Abdab is standing across the pit, laughing maniacally that he warned you and that you didn't take your last chance to leave. It's difficult to see, but there are animatronic snakes in the pit, including some that lunge right at riders in a legitimate jump scare moment to Abdab's delight. Moving on, the vehicles move through a corridor where snakes lunge from the mouths of skulls embedded into the wall, making for what looked like a frightening continuation of the previous scene. As the train enters the next chamber, which is full of skeletons impaled on spikes, the ride stops and you encounter Abdab yet again. Disappointed that you're still alive, he says you'll pull the lever and you'll get spiked, but as he does so, the wall instead revolves and sends him down a secret passage. Lighting then illuminates this other part of the scene, where you watch his feet sticking out of a sarcophagus as you hear him greedily trying to reach for the emerald. His feet then fall in and the lid slams shut, revealing a ghoul holding the actual emerald and laughing at Abdab's misfortune in a comedic twist. The ride vehicle begins moving again, and as riders avoid sawing teeth hanging from the ceiling, they encounter another ghoul who's controlling the trap mechanism. Riders try to escape the ghouls as they throw axes that end up hitting the wall, and emerging out to another large-scale scene, the train circles around a pit of lava below a massive jackal statue, which would turn its head to look at riders. Or at least, this effect was supposed to work, as I rarely saw it moving on video. On the left side of the scene, Abdab is hanging onto a crumbling pillar, foolishly trying to reach for the emerald embedded into the hand of the statue. As the vehicle travels out of the scene, it goes dark and you hear Abdab begin to yell as if losing balance, but turning forward, the train now travels through a spinning tunnel. Coming out the other side, stone heads along the wall begin to chant as if readying for a sacrifice, and moving further into the scene, they only become louder. The vehicle stops, and as the chanting reaches its climax, the scene reveals mummified dancers and a ghoul holding an electric guitar, making for one of the most unexpected scene reveals that I've ever seen in a ride. He begins playing a thrash metal song called Jukebox Jewel, with the lyrics essentially taunting Abdab for daring to rob the tomb as he's restrained in a sarcophagus. The song continues in a cheeky manner, where the ghouls sing about everything they're going to do to him, and as the guitarist launches into a solo, the lid begins to close, cursing Abdab as they turn him into a ghoul.
You dare to steal the ancient jewel, so now you shall become a ghoul!
Moving out of the scene and into the dark, there's a jump scare moment where mummies are revealed. And continuing further, Abdab is heard again, laughing in delight and yelling that the treasure is his at last. Rounding the corner, riders see Abdab in possession of the emerald, but he seems unaware that he has become a ghoul in a final comedic moment before the train returns to the station. It may not be apparent through just my description, but Terror Tomb blended horror with comedy pretty effectively. Once the ghouls appear, they're certainly threatening, but almost cartoonishly so, and with the ride ending with a metal concert as they sing about what they're going to do to Abdab, the ride is just so brilliantly funny in a way that you would never expect. The Fifth Dimension seemed like an incredible ride, but Terror Tomb was more than a worthy replacement, bringing both thematic cohesion to this area of the park and building a ride that was absurdly clever and wildly unique. While Terror Tomb is generally considered a worthy replacement for the Fifth Dimension, when it came time to update Professor Burp's Bubbleworks, the story played out a bit differently. After a 15-year run, the attraction picked up Imperial Leather as a sponsor, which for people outside of the UK who might not know, it's a soap and toiletry company. Because this was the case, the attraction was renamed to just Bubbleworks, and the theme was changed, recycling most of the same ride by transforming it into a soap factory to satisfy the sponsor. You'll notice immediately that the station is a lot more colorful, and boarding the tub, the first scene depicts a bubblehead in an overflowing bubble bath. In the next part of the ride, it appears to have to do with bubble mixing and bursting, and I don't really know what else. It's clear that Chessington just painted over previous ride scenes and took things out to recontextualize this as a soap factory, but none of it actually makes any sense if you look at it closely. Next comes the tickle test, then various pieces of machinery that have nothing to do with bubble production, and then a jungle scene, which I think implies that different plants are being harvested to create certain scents for the soap. At least this extended theme makes a bit of sense, but then you move past the rubber duck hatchery, which is a new kinetic piece, and then the ride becomes all about producing rubber ducks in the former bottle decontamination scene. The funfair then replaced the bottles with rubber ducks, which transitioned into the drop into the fountain scene, which now no longer makes any sense or has any context explaining why it's there. The ride then concludes with fireworks, which feels quite abrupt, since the fountain scene lost all meaning it had. Bubbleworks not only did a huge disservice to the charming and beloved ride that it replaced, but it's not even a competently put together attraction, as its scenes are literally meaningless. What's this reactor do, and how does it produce a rub-a-dub test that it states on the sign? The content doesn't make sense, and the entire retheme of the ride centered around just putting bubbles and rubber ducks everywhere, making for not just a truly awful replacement, but an actual ride with no content. The public, and of course John Wardley, were outraged, but despite this negative reception, it continued to operate in this state through 2016. The early 2000s is where Chessington World of Adventures started to lose its direction, as in 2001, Terror Tomb closed after only an 8-year run, being rethemed into Tomb Blaster for the 2002 operating season. While it was interesting that the vehicles were now equipped with blasters and targets were added to the track, this new ride mostly recycled what was there before, but removed all the weird charm of Terror Tomb. Tomb Blaster is fine. It is certainly not the egregious new version of Bubbleworks, but by this point, the influence of John Wardley had left the park. I think it's also worth mentioning that Bubbleworks was replaced by the Gruffalo River Ride adventure in 2017, which I also thought was fine, even if it fails to live up to the original Professor Burp's Bubbleworks. However, Chessington World of Adventures, as much as I liked the park in its current state, feels like it very much peaked in the mid-90s and failed to get the love that it needed to grow into the world-class theme park that it should have been. It already had 3 incredible attractions with Professor Burp's Bubbleworks, the Fifth Dimension, and its replacement, Terror Tomb, but because the park never got the recognition that it deserved, all of these attractions went under the radar, despite being top of the industry and competitive with Disney in terms of charm and quality. Many people grew up in the UK and loved this park and its classic rides, and through this video, I wanted to bring awareness of their existence to a larger audience, because they truly were fantastic. Hopefully, if you did not experience them yourself, you learned something new today about these amazing attractions, because I certainly did, but I also knew that this video topic was relatively niche. So if you haven't yet left a like on the video to help boost its reach, I would very much appreciate it if you did so. As always though, if you like videos like these and have not yet subscribed and hit the bell notification yet either, you can also do so now to be alerted to new videos as they're released.